They saw a quiet man, calm, composed, almost invisible in the chaos around him. No loud words, no show of force, nothing that screamed danger. Just stillness. And that's exactly why they made the biggest mistake of their lives. Because what they didn't understand was simple. Silence isn't weakness and calm isn't fear. They thought they had found an easy target, someone they could push, test, maybe even humiliate. But in the next few moments, everything they believed about strength, power, and control was about to be shattered. Because the man they chose wasn't just any man. He was the wrong man. And once the line was crossed, there was no going back. They watched him from a distance at first, whispering among themselves, measuring him not by who he truly was, but by what they could see on the surface. A lean frame, relaxed posture, no signs of aggression. To them, he didn't fit the image of someone dangerous. In their minds, strength had a specific look, loud voices, big muscles, intimidating presence. And since he had none of that, they assumed he had nothing to offer. That assumption became their confidence, and that confidence quickly turned into arrogance. One of them stepped forward, testing the waters with a smirk that carried more disrespect than courage. A few careless words were thrown, designed to provoke, to get a reaction. But there was nothing. No anger. No reply. Just a calm gaze that didn't flinch, didn't break, didn't even acknowledge the insult in the way they expected. That silence confused them at first, but then it fed their ego. They took it as submission, weakness, fear. And just like that, the situation escalated. Another man joined in, louder this time, pushing closer into his space. The air shifted, but not in the way they noticed. They thought they were gaining control, tightening the pressure, cornering him into a response. But what they didn't realize was that every second of silence wasn't hesitation. It was control. A level of control they had never seen before. His breathing stayed steady. His posture unchanged. Even as the tension grew thicker, he remained, grounded as if the chaos around him had no effect at all. Then came the moment they crossed the line. A shove. Not strong, not calculated, just careless enough to show complete disrespect. In their minds, that was the final push. The act that would either break him or force him to back down. They expected fear, maybe anger. But what happened next didn't match any expectation they had. It didn't start with a warning. It didn't build up. It just happened. In a fraction of a second, everything shifted. The calm man they had been mocking moved, but not in a way they could predict. It wasn't wild. It wasn't reckless. It was precise, controlled, effortless. Before they could even process what was happening, one of them was already off balance, his confidence collapsing along with his stance. The others froze, their minds struggling to catch up with what their eyes had just witnessed. There was no wasted motion, no extra effort, just pure efficiency. Every movement had purpose. Every action perfectly timed. It wasn't about aggression, it was about mastery, and that's what made it terrifying. The man who had stepped forward first tried to recover, but panic had already taken over. His movements became rushed, uncoordinated, driven by fear rather than thought. And that's when it became clear. The situation had completely reversed. The hunters had become the ones caught off guard. Another attempt was made, this time more desperate than confident. But it didn't matter. The outcome had already been decided the moment they underestimated him. Each move they made only exposed more of their weakness, while he remained composed, adapting instantly, staying one step ahead without even seeming to try. The crowd around them, which had initially been filled with curiosity and anticipation, fell into stunned silence. What they were witnessing didn't look like a fight. It looked like something else entirely, something refined, something disciplined, something far beyond brute force. There was no anger in his actions, no unnecessary harm, just control, absolute control. And that's what broke them, not just physically, but mentally. Because in that moment, they realized something they hadn't before. Strength wasn't what they thought it was. It wasn't loud. It wasn't chaotic. It didn't need to prove itself with noise or intimidation. Real strength was quiet, precise, unshakable. And by the time they understood that, it was already too late. The man they thought was weak hadn't just defended himself. He had exposed them. Every flaw, every false belief, every moment of overconfidence was laid bare in seconds. And there was nothing they could do about it. He stepped back just as calmly as he had stood before. No celebration. No words. No need to prove anything further. The message had already been delivered louder than anything they could have imagined, and as they stood there trying to process what had just happened, one truth became impossible to ignore. They hadn't just picked a fight. They had picked the wrong man. They thought they were in control of the moment. Every second that passed without a reaction from him made them feel stronger, louder, more dominant. The energy around them fed their confidence, and the small crowd gathering nearby only made it worse. This wasn't just about testing someone anymore. It had turned into a performance. And in their minds, they were winning. But what they didn't realize was that the entire situation was already slipping out of their hands. He stood there calm as ever, his eyes observing everything without revealing anything. It wasn't the kind of look that challenged them, and that's what made it so dangerous. There was no emotion to read, no signal to prepare for, just stillness. The kind of stillness that hides something deeper, something they were too blind to notice. One of them laughed, trying to break that silence again. The sound was forced, almost desperate now, as if they needed reassurance that they still had the upper hand. Another stepped closer, invading his space even more aggressively this time. They were pushing harder, faster, trying to provoke something, anything that would confirm their belief. But the man they were dealing with wasn't reacting the way normal people do, because this wasn't about emotion anymore. It was about timing. And then it happened. No build-up, no warning, no dramatic shift in expression. Just a sudden, precise movement that changed everything in an instant. It was so fast, so clean that for a moment it didn't even register as real. 1 second they were advancing, the next, they were no longer in control. The first man felt it before he understood it. His balance disappeared, his body reacting too late to something his mind hadn't even processed yet. The ground came closer faster than expected, and the confidence that had filled his chest seconds ago was gone. The others froze. Not because they chose to, but because they had no idea what just happened. That's the thing about true mastery. It doesn't give you time to prepare. It doesn't announce itself. It simply appears, and by the time you recognize it, you're already behind. The calm man, Bruce Lee, hadn't changed his expression. There was still no anger, no aggression in his face. Just focus. Sharp, unbreakable focus. His movements were controlled, almost effortless, like everything he did was already decided before it even began. One of them tried to step forward again, but this time, hesitation crept in. That tiny pause, that fraction of doubt was all it took to shift the balance even further. Because now they weren't acting out of confidence anymore. They were reacting. And reacting means you're already late. He moved again. Not faster, just at the exact right moment. A step, a shift, a motion so precise it looked almost unreal. The second man's attempt to regain control collapsed instantly. His strength, his size, his aggression, it all meant nothing against timing and technique this refined. The crowd had gone silent now. What started as a tense confrontation had turned into something else entirely, something almost unreal to watch. There was no chaos, no wild exchange of blows. It was controlled, deliberate, almost like watching a demonstration rather than a fight. And that's what made it even more unsettling, because there was no struggle from him. Every movement had purpose. Every action was efficient. There was no wasted energy, no unnecessary force. It was as if he was operating on a completely different level, one they couldn't even begin to understand. Another attempt came, more desperate this time. But desperation only makes things worse when you're up against someone who thrives on control. The moment they rushed in, it was already over. Their movements were predictable, driven by panic rather than strategy, and he adapted instantly. That's what separated him. Not just speed, not just skill, but awareness. The ability to read the moment, to understand what was coming before it even happened. While they were still thinking about their next move, he had already acted, and that's why they couldn't win, because they were always one step behind. The man who had started it all slowly tried to stand again, his confidence completely shattered. Now, the smirk was gone. The arrogance had disappeared. In its place was something else, something much more real. Realization. He looked at the man in front of him, truly seeing him for the first time. Not as an easy target, not as someone weak, but as someone far beyond what he had imagined. But by then, it didn't matter, because the moment had already passed. The energy had completely shifted. What once felt like control now felt like pressure. But this time, it wasn't coming from them. It was coming from him. Not through intimidation, not through aggression, but through presence. Pure, undeniable presence. He didn't need to say anything. He didn't need to prove anything further, because everything that needed to be shown had already been shown. The crowd understood it. The men understood it. Even the silence carried that understanding now. This wasn't just about a fight. It was about a lesson. A moment where illusion met reality, and reality won without effort. He stepped back slightly, not in retreat, but in completion. His posture relaxed again, just like before, as if nothing had happened. As if the entire situation had been nothing more than a brief interruption, and that's what made it unforgettable. Because in just a few seconds, everything changed. The confidence, the energy, the power, it all shifted in an instant. And the ones who thought they were in control were left standing there trying to understand how it slipped away so easily. But the truth was simple. It was never theirs to begin with. They didn't rush in this time. After what they had just witnessed, something inside them had shifted. The careless confidence, the loud arrogance, it was gone. Replaced by hesitation, by doubt, by the uncomfortable realization that they were no longer dealing with someone ordinary. The air felt heavier now. No one spoke. No one laughed. Even the crowd that had gathered kept their distance, watching in complete silence. Because what had just happened didn't feel like a normal confrontation anymore. It felt like something deeper. Something they couldn't fully understand, but could definitely feel. He stood there again, exactly as before. Still. Calm. Unbothered. As if none of it had required effort. That was the part that stayed with them the most. Not just what he did, but how easily he did it. No strain, no aggression, no need to dominate, just control. Pure, effortless control. One of them glanced at the others, searching for some kind of reassurance, but there was none left to give. The unspoken agreement between them had already started to break. Because deep down they all knew the same thing now. They had made a mistake. A big one. But pride is a difficult thing to let go of, even when the truth is right in front of you. So, one last attempt was made, not as bold as before, not as confident, but driven by something else now. A need to reclaim what they had already lost. A need to prove, if not to him, then at least to themselves, that they still had control over the situation. But control doesn't come from trying harder, and that's what they failed to understand. The moment he moved again, it wasn't surprising anymore. It was inevitable. Bruce Lee didn't change his expression. His eyes stayed focused, his breathing steady, his movements as precise as ever. There was no rush in what he did, no panic, no wasted energy, just timing, Perfect timing. The man who stepped forward hesitated for just a fraction of a second, and that was enough. Because against someone operating at this level, hesitation is the same as defeat. Before the motion was even complete, the outcome had already been decided. A shift in balance, a redirection of force, a movement so smooth it barely looked real. And just like that, the last bit of resistance disappeared. No struggle, no chaos, just silence. The kind of silence that forces you to think, forces you to see things the way they really are. He didn't follow up. He didn't press forward. He didn't need to, because this was never about overpowering anyone. It was about understanding, about awareness, about being so in control of yourself that nothing around you can shake that balance. That's what they failed to see from the beginning. They thought strength was something you show, something loud, something aggressive. But standing in front of him now, they realized how wrong they were. Real strength doesn't need attention. It doesn't need validation. It doesn't even need recognition. It simply exists. And when it reveals itself, even for a moment, it changes everything. The men who had once surrounded him now stood at a distance, not forced back but choosing not to step forward again. Their posture had changed. Their energy had changed. The entire dynamic had shifted in a way that couldn't be reversed, because once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. One of them looked down, avoiding eye contact. Another took a slow step back, then another, not in fear, but in acceptance. The kind that comes when you finally understand your place in a moment you misjudged completely. There were no more words, no more challenges, nothing left to prove, and that's when it became clear. The fight had ended long before this moment. Teo. Ended the second they underestimated him. Everything that followed was just the result of that one mistake. He adjusted his stance slightly, returning to that same calm presence he had from the beginning. No victory pose, no sense of pride. Just stillness, like nothing had ever disturbed him. And maybe nothing really did. Because for someone like him, this wasn't chaos. It was clarity. A moment where everything moved exactly the way it should. Where every action had purpose and every outcome was already understood before it even happened. That's the level they had stepped into without realizing. And now, standing on the outside of it, they could finally see it clearly. Not as a fight, but as a lesson in control, a lesson in awareness, a lesson in what real power actually looks like. And the hardest part wasn't what happened to them. It was knowing that it could have been avoided, if they had just understood one simple thing from the start. The quiet man they chose to test was never the one they should have challenged.